So back in 2021, I made a video called How Many Chapters Will Jujutsu Kaisen Season 2 Cover? And now that the amazing season has come and finished, there were some things I got wrong on that video, like assuming that Season 2 would have the same amount of episodes as Season 1, and that I said Season 2 would exactly end at the Yuta part when he says, "I'll kill Yuji Itadori." Well, I mean, technically it sorta ends there. There's just one more scene that comes after that, which is the panel of Yuji clapping his hands in Chapter 139. But all that being said, it's time to do the same thing for Season 3. If you're a manga reader, you'll know that the next major story arc after Shibuya is an arc called the Culling Games, and oh boy, the most crucial part of these videos is choosing how many episodes the season will have, because that will heavily affect the pacing and the decision for where it all ends off. You know, is it going to be 22 episodes, 23 like the previous season, 24 like Season 1, 25 like My Hero Academia, 26 like the first season of Demon Slayer? There's just so many to choose from, so we'll do a spin the wheel and work from there. 24 episodes like Season 1 it is. So even though the last season adapted a panel in Chapter 139, it didn't fully adapt Chapter 138. So Episode 1 will adapt Chapters 138, 139, and 140. The first scene of Season 3 will begin by showing the Zenin family talking about who the next head of the clan will be, confirming that now Bito, the former, died in Shibuya. This will be the first time we see Naoya in the anime. Of course, this will also establish Naoya, Ogi, Junichi, the entire clan in general, as an antagonistic force for the upcoming episodes. After that's done, it'll cut back to Yuji and Chozo's short dialogue in the Shibuya aftermath. This will be a good reminder to the viewers on how hard and depressing Yuji was feeling after the Shibuya Incident arc. Also solidify that Chozo is officially on our side now. There's this cool panel shot showing Yuji, Chozo, Yuta, and Naoya getting ready to meet each other, so yeah, the way they can adapt this, it'll be a nice way to tease for what's to come at the end of the episode, because the second half will pick up from the last season's cliffhanger, showing Yuji and Chozo doing some cursed exterminations until they're joined by Yuta and Naoya, as I believe this episode will give us a little snippet of the two MCs fighting each other, ending exactly at Chapter 140. There's a good amount of action panels that take up the pages, so starting the season with 3 chapters should be doable. Episode 2 will cover Chapters 141, 142, and 143. It'll feature the entire Yuji vs. Yuta fight and the Chozo vs. Naoya fight, then show us the reveal of Yuta just pretending to kill Yuji Itadori all along. Some anime onlys will be relieved knowing that Yuta is not as dense as they probably imagined when they first watched the episode, but yeah, both of these fights aren't that long. I'm sure the anime will extend and add extra scenes to both of them, especially the Yuji versus Yuta fight. We'll also see a glimpse of Yuji's memory, remembering the stitches that his mom had. This will further clarify how Yuji and Chozo are technically blood related by Kenjaku. And yeah, I can see this chapter ending with Fushiguro returning, seeing that he's okay after the previous season, and asking Yuji for his help with Sumiki being in the Culling Games. I think this will be a nice cliffhanger for, you know, just hearing about the next major story arc. Episode 3 will cover Chapters 144 and 145. This will be an interesting, intriguing, but wholly a yapping filled episode, because Megumi will further explain what they need to do next in order to combat this jujutsu terrorism that Kenjaku has created. Then we'll see Yuji and Ko meet up with Yuki and Maki, revealing Maki's new status and appearance after Shibuya, as their plan is to visit Master Tengen for answers. Considering the stylistic approach that Mappa did with Hidden Inventory, I can see them kind of extending the search of the crew exploring the Tomb of the Star, leading the remaining length of the episode to cover the first chapter of Tengen's meeting. That first chapter is the one with the most words and info dump. Like, I timed myself, not just reading it blatantly, but also just reading it at the pace of how I thought the anime would adapt it, because, for example, some of the discussions, like when they mentioned Kenjaku losing to the Six Eyes twice, or the impact that Toji had affecting the present time, it's conversations that require a lot of context to understand, especially when they go in depth about the rules and mechanics of the Culling Games. Like, it's not something that should be rushed or read fast. I think almost every word should be, you know, conveyed with some visual, or just have something on the screen on top of them speaking. As yeah, I just can't see Mappa doing 3 chapters in this episode, leading the episode to end with introducing a Culling Game player named Angel, the one who possesses a curse technique that can free Satoru Gojo from the prison realm. Episode 4 will cover Chapters 146, 147, and 148. So 146 is the second and last chapter of the Tengen meeting. It's not as much words or info as the previous chapter, so they'll wrap that meeting up, then cut into the short introduction of Takaba. Here, we're slowly seeing more and more awakenings of these players for the upcoming arc. That said, chapter 147 is the whole Panda and Yaga backdrop. It's honestly not that long, but that also depends if Mappa will actually show the fight between Yaga and Gakuganji. While I do appreciate seeing extended or added scenes that the anime does for the manga, I feel like this one is not needed. The off-screen fight kind of matches with the tone and atmosphere of the commotion. So chapters 146 and 147 could probably take 15 minutes of the episode, while chapter 148 will take up the remaining 6-ish minutes. This showcases a POV switch of Maki returning to the Zenin headquarters to get some cursed tools for the Culling Games. There's some noteworthy dialogue here, like Maki wanting to create a safe place for Mai, Maki's feelings for the Zenin clan, Maki's mom being disappointed. Like, I think this will be a good segment of the episode to establish the toxicity and, patriarchy of the Zenin, so that in the next episode, it'll feel very good for the viewers when they're finally eliminated. But yeah, I see this episode ending with the Ogi fight, specifically with Ogi defeating and berating his own daughters. Episode 5 will cover chapters 149, 150, 151, and 152. You might say that, oh, 4 chapters is a lot, but this is technically only 3.5 chapters, since chapter 152 is only 9 pages long. This was the time when Gege was sick and had to take a 2-month break or something like that. There's also a lot of fighting and action panels that take up the pages. But yeah, I have this episode starting with Ogi throwing Maki and Mai at the, training or disciplinary pit. That eventually leads to seeing the inner domain thing between Maki and Mai, then covering the entire Zenin Massacre, the Naoya fight, and ending with Maki killing her mom to move forward with the Culling Games. I think it's reasonable for the downfall of the Zenin clan to be covered in, one full episode. As like I said earlier, the fights are just filled with action panels, not a lot of dialogue happening. As the scene that'll probably take the most time here is the Maki and Mai moment. Everything after that is pretty fast sailing, but yeah, moving on. Episode 6 will cover chapters 153, 154, and pages 1 to 14 of chapter 155, so a bit more than 2.5 chapters. This episode will switch POVs with Yuji and Megumi trying to recruit Hakari. I think the build-up to Hakari's gambling matches and the crew infiltrating the building will take some time. They'll likely add a bit more action scenes to the fake Yuji versus Panda fight, since it is Mappa after all. But yeah, I see this episode reaching the part where Yuji finally meets up with Hakari until he gets suspicious of Yuji, and the episode ends with both of them clashing heads. Episode 7 will cover the remaining 5 pages of chapter 155, 156, and 157. As yeah, I expect this episode to wrap up the entire Megumi versus Kirara fight and the short Yuji versus Hakari fight. Not gonna lie, the Megumi fight will take some time, since Kirara's star constellation technique, the explanation, and the process of Megumi figuring it out, it's a lot. That being said, with the previous episode focusing on the crew trying to recruit the third-year students, then I think it makes sense for the next episode, that being this episode, to have them finally convinced and joined by the end. Episode 8 will cover chapters 158 and 159, just 2 chapters, as this will be considered the Higuruma episode, because the beginning will show us Hakari and Kirara getting up to speed with what's happened to Jujutsu Society. Then it'll introduce us to the Koganes, how they're part of the Culling Games, how Yuji's already considered a player, Kashimo's sick introduction, and the crew establishing that a sorcerer named Higuruma is a target for adding rules. Not gonna lie, chapter 158 does have a lot going on and a lot of things being said, so I think this chapter can be covered in about like 7-8 minutes, leaving the rest of the 12 minutes to be spent on the Higuruma backstory. Despite it being a single chapter, it's definitely gonna take a lot more time, since it's a type of backstory where it needs a really good fleshed out adaptation to truly understand and feel for Higuruma's character. Even reading it in the manga, it did not feel like a 1-chapter backstory. It kind of felt like more. So honestly, this could take, like I said, about 12 minutes till the end of the episode, leading episode 9 to cover chapters 160, 161, 162, and 11 pages of 163. This episode will start by seeing Kinjaku in the quote-unquote cursed realm, asking the non-sorcerers if they want to participate in the Culling Games or not. After that, it just shows the crew finalizing their plan, establishing which goes in which colony, then proceeds to enter the Culling Games. It's honestly a pretty quick chapter to cover, which is why I believe they can do 3.5 for this episode, because yeah, after that, it's just Yuji and Megumi entering Tokyo Colony number 1, and we see more of Yuji's POV first, handling Haba and Hanryu. These are just light fights. The pages are filled with action sequences, not a lot of talking or dialogue going on. That being said, it'll also show us the glimpse of Reggie, slightly introducing his character, and also introduce Amai and Remy. But I think the episode will end at the point when Remy brings Megumi to Reggie, while Amai brings Yuji to Higuruma. This would allow episode 10 to cover the entire Higuruma versus Yuji fight in one episode. episode, featuring the remaining 8 pages of chapter 163, 164, 165, and 166. That's less than 3.5 chapters. They can definitely do it. I know there's some moments in this fight where it needs to be slowed down, or there's a lot of dialogue with Higuruma's domain expansion, but that's okay because there's also a lot of pages where it's just filled with action. So it's gonna make some free time for moments that need to be slowed down, like the part when, Yuji places himself guilty for Shibuya, or the part where Yuji is thinking how to outsmart the court trial. Just in general, a lot of Shibuya fights in season 2 were covered in one episode. Example, Yuji versus Chozo, the squad versus Dagon, Yuji and Megumi versus Awasaka, Sukuna versus Jogo. All those fights were adapted in a single episode, and each of them at least contained 4 or more chapters. So I've got no doubt or worry that, they won't cover not just the Higuruma versus Yuji fight, but most of the Culling Game fights in 1 to 2 episodes. That being said, episode 11 will cover chapters 167, 168, 169, and 170. This wraps up the Yuji versus Higuruma fight, with Higuruma adding the transfer points between players rule in the Culling Games, as we then cut back to Megumi getting lured to meet Reggie. Reggie goes on about how the Culling Games have a secret purpose and that Kenjaku won't reveal that secret purpose until the very end, so he tries to recruit Megumi to be his ally, but the negotiation breaks down since Reggie isn't willing to give Megumi his points once the rule is added. So this leads Megumi to fight Reggie and his crew. Not to repeat myself, but 168, 169, and 170, they go by pretty quickly since there isn't a lot of dialogue in these 3 chapters. Like, most of the talking was from Reggie at the beginning, saying that the Culling Games was sus. After that, it's just smooth sailing from there. Of course, Takaba does arrive in this episode as well. He ends up dealing with Hazanoki, as I think the chapter will end on a hype cliffhanger, with Megumi unleashing his domain expansion against Reggie. This would allow episode 12 to cover the remaining parts of the fight, featuring chapters 171, 172, and 173. So like I said, it'll show the whole domain battle, the part where they get out of the domain, until Reggie bleeds out and curses Megumi to die like a fool. I'm honestly really excited to see Megumi versus Reggie animated. The domain battle was crazy, and it was just also a very back and forth battle in general. I like the whole sorcerers being a con artist point coming into play at the end, as this should wrap up Megumi's POV, preparing the next POV switch, introducing the top 4 deadlock members of the Sendai Colony, as the episode will exactly end with Yuta slaying one of those deadlock members, Druvlock Tawala, and the narrator stating that Yuta is second to Gojo in unusual abilities or in being a prodigy, depending on what translations you read. Episode 13 will cover chapters 174, 175, 176, and 177. This takes care of the Sendai Colony's first half, showcasing Yuta defeating Kurorishi, then Yuta fighting Uro and Ishigori. Again, you look at Shibuya, many fights could flow with one episode adapting 4 or more chapters, so I think they can get pretty far here, ending at the point where Yuta calls upon Rika as the cliffhanger. I'm gonna need the Mappa higher-ups to give their animators time to cook, because they're gonna make this fight look beautiful. I mean, it's Yuta Akotsu, so Mappa, the fans, Gege, they know Yuta's the man, so I'm sure the Sendai Colony will get the Sukuna versus Jogo type special treatment. As episode 14 will cover chapters 178, 179, 180, and the first 5 pages of 181. This will finish the remaining portion of the Sendai Colony, starting with the explanation and information of the quote-unquote new Rika, up till Yuta defeating Ishigori and Uro, with both of them giving Yuta their points at the end. They're definitely gonna extend the fight a bunch, add a lot of extra scenes here and there. Episode 15 will cover the remaining 14 pages of chapter 181, 182, 183, and 184. The beginning will introduce us to Charles Bernard, an aspiring French mangaka who's a player in the Culling Games, and we see him fight Hakari in Tokyo Colony number 2. Now, I was thinking this could even reach the Kashimo versus Panda fight, because I really don't think an entire 22-minute episode will just be fully about Hakari versus Charles, other than, explaining Hakari's domain expansion, which takes a long time. Their fight reads and flows pretty quickly, so Charles's introduction, him fighting Hakari, the battle inside the domain, I think that could be done in like 13, 14-ish minutes, leaving the Kashimo versus Panda beatdown to get the remaining 6 minutes of the episode. This will have episode 16 to cover chapters 185, 186, and 187. So it'll start by showing the dreamlike inner domain sequence with Panda and his siblings, establishing that his siblings' core is now dead or gone. As flashbacks or backstories like these can take quite some time in an anime episode. Example, the Nobara backstory, which was 1 chapter long in the manga, that took about 13 minutes in the anime. So with this Panda siblings tribute, I mean, it's shorter than the Nobara one, so I can just see this taking up the first 8 minutes of the episode. Specifically, when Hakari makes his epic entrance to save Panda, that's when the opening will start playing, leaving the remaining 12 minutes to progress the Hakari versus Kashimo fight. 12 minutes, they can get pretty far. Of course, this is a fight where the staff will add a lot of scenes and go crazy with the animation, as I think it'll it'll end when we get the mini flashback to old Kinjaku recruiting an Edo period Kashimo for the Culling Games, and Kashimo saying that he'll fight Sukuna. Episode 17 will cover chapters 188, 189, and 190. So this will finish the Hakari versus Kashimo fight, wrap up the Tokyo Colony number 2 POV, and switch to the Sakurajima Colony with Maki and Noritoshi. Like I said before, I do think the staff will extend a lot of action sequences with Hakari versus Kashimo since it's mostly hand-to-hand combat, and they can definitely slow the pacing down once the fight comes to an end, specifically when Momo arrives and explains to Hakari about the updates and status of the crew's progression in the Culling Games. This will also be a good reminder or checkpoint for the viewers, later reaching the Sakurajima Colony, ending exactly at the point when Cursed Spirit Naoya arrives. Episode 18 will cover chapters 191, 192, 193, and 194. So this will start with a short callback to Noritoshi returning to the Kamo clan after the Shibuya Incident arc, finding out that Kinjaku has taken over headquarters and their leader position. It's a bit of a yapping sesh, but when is it never with Kenny? The rest of the fight, however, flows pretty quickly. Like, as I skim through these panels, you'll notice that there isn't a lot of dialogue, just action and movement taking place. The only time I see pacing slowing down in this episode, other than the Kinjaku yapping sesh, is when it gets to the Noritoshi redemption part. This is when Noritoshi thinks about how his mom gave up and left with a new family. Obviously, we learn later at the colony that she never intended to leave Noritoshi, but yeah, I see this episode ending with a bit of a cliffhanger, showing two new random players intervening in the fight, with one yelling katana and the other yelling sumo. Episode 19 will cover chapters 195, 196, 197, and 198. This is going to be considered the Maki episode, as first of all, it'll quickly introduce us to Daido and Mio, how they ended up getting here. It's only like 6 pages long in the manga. The only parts that will be slowed down in this episode will be when Maki does the sumo training with Mio, when she eventually gains her mental freedom, and when she cuts down Naoya at the end, conveying that she's an equal fighter to Toji Zenin. Like, I don't even know if it's right to call this a power-up, because it technically is, but Maki just retuning herself will be the main focus and slowing points of the episode. Everything after that, like chapter 196 for example, goes by very quickly, with most of it featuring action panels and less dialogue. As yeah, I believe they can fit the domain expansion sequence too, reaching a badass ending with the narrator stating that a demonic fighter equal to Toji was fully realized. Episode 20 will cover chapters 199, 200, and 201. This can only take 3 chapters since there's no action happening, it's all dialogue. First, it wraps up the Sakurajima Colony, getting to see the true feelings of Norotoshi's mom. Then it goes back to our main crew, Yuji and Megumi, settling down with Angel and Takaba in a random hotel. This is where they recoup, introduce the Angel, talk about their progress and next steps for the Culling Games. Also, Sukuna getting revealed to be the Fallen One. It does have its fair share of dialogue. More talking begins when Kinjaku discusses and manipulates nation leaders to have their military invade Japan for cursed energy. Honestly, I think this will be a nice episode to kind of cool down from all the back-to-back fighting we've seen in each colonies, as it'll exactly end with the main crew preparing for the invasion happening in Japan. Episode 21 will cover chapters 202, 203, and 204. This could potentially reach for another chapter, but I think 3 chapters is enough, considering the beginning does have some crucial exposition dialogue. First, with Yuki talking to Tengen, Kinjaku talking to Chozo, revealing his endgame and motivation for wanting to create the Tengen merger curse. Chozo's 3 brothers power-ups could also have some extra focus on, but with everything else just being Kinjaku fighting Chozo, then yeah, I think 3 chapters is pretty good, as it should end when Chozo forces Kinjaku to reveal and use the gravity technique, while Yuki arrives at the scene to be the episode's cliffhanger. Episode 22 will cover chapters 205, 206, 207, and 208. This should finish up the entire Tomb of the Star battle. While there is a few heavy dialogue and slow points here and there's also a lot of raw, sick, heavy action panels. I think 4 chapters is definitely enough. Again, you look at all season 2 fights that also contained 4 chapters of more in the manga. So yeah, it should likely end with Kinjaku achieving his mission, successfully capturing Master Tengen. Episode 23 will cover chapters 209, 210, and 211. This goes back to the main crew as we see the military forces invading Japan. They weed out some of the weak sorcerers like Haba and Remy, extracting their cursed energy for their nation. But of course, the backstabbing comes into play when we see the military unexpectedly facing cursed spirits. I'm not sure if Mappa will extend these scenes. They might, but I don't know if they could, because chapter 211 has a lot of talking and recapping. But anyways, chapter 211 is pretty much like the checkpoint mark for the end of the Culling Games, or at least the end of the whole POV switching with the colonies, because now that our crew has gained the necessary amount of points, they discuss a lot about everything that's happened so far, their progress, the future, the rules, the mechanics and just what they need to do next, etc. So that's why I don't think they can extend the military invasion too much, as yeah, the episode will end on a huge cliffhanger with Sumiki meeting up with Yuji and Megumi, revealing that she's actually not Sumiki, but a reincarnated sorcerer instead. Now, assuming that season 3 is going to be a 24 episode season, just like season 1, then under said conditions, the last episode will cover chapters 212, 213, 214, and 215. I know a 4-chapter episode pacing might be too much for a season finale, but hear me out. These 4 chapters are straight up just hype, exhilarating, stressful, and features a ton of action. Like, okay, chapter 212 doesn't have a lot of words being said. It's just the, your Rosa reveal, Sukuna using the Enchained Binding Vow, him switching vessels with Megumi. Then the next 3 chapters are all smoke. Sukuna goes on demon time, flexes the 10 Shadows power under his control, clashes with Angel, which goes by very quickly. Then it's Yuji versus Sukuna. Yuji is just filled with anger and rage as he throws himself to Sukuna and goes crazy. We do get a bit of backdrop with Sukuna going over his perspective on weak beings needing to swallow the fate that life gives them, but yeah, just instantly picks back up with Yuji walking through all of Sukuna's slashes in a badass way. Then Maki joins the scene as we get this sick duo team up of her and Yuji fighting Sukuna. Like I said, it's a lot of action and movements. These 4 chapters progress very quickly, so the episode can easily extend a lot of scenes or make the fight last longer in the anime. As yeah, how painful, gut-wrenching of a cliffhanger would it be if it ends with Sukuna leaving in Megumi's body, flying away with Uraume, and looking down at Yuji, who continues to suffer once more.